and Colin Bleak. So I've asked each panel member to say a bit about who they are and give their views on the topic of today's workshop, and then we'll throw it open to discussion. As I said, we have one question already from Laura, which is an extremely good question. We had a question earlier posed on barriers and difficulties of going between pure and applied, so we might touch on that. But I say, please send in. Oh, we have another question. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so let's kick off. Lars, do you want to say a few words?
I say a few words, not going into the questions right now. I think we'll do that later.
We'll do that later. Yeah,
perfect. Okay, I'm Lars Schever. I'm doing optimization at the School of Mathematics at the University of Edinburgh. Originally, my PhD and so on was in discrete geometry, relatively close to optimization, but then over time I sort of drifted into optimization and more into the applied side of optimization. What I liked about today's talks and sort of the highlight is we need to think about this as a community effort and less as a single personal effort. I think Colin made this very clear when he said, well, we had sort of Poincaré as sort of, as you said, sort of the last universal mathematician in a sense. So I think we need to think about community. How do we make this communication happen that we don't get into the sort of standard mode of working where everybody works for themselves, but how we exchange ideas. And I think I would be interested to hear about how we, as people coming more from the applied side, can sort of make this communication happen. Another point that I would like to mention is what I would be interested how people think about. I'm skeptical in a sense about the sort of, we have an application, we sort of derive new pure math and directly transfer back to the same application. I'm less confident that that is going to happen. I can see sort of one way going, but I can't see this forth and back because often, in my experience, the application problems that I encounter, the mathematically challenging extreme cases where really interesting new mathematics has happened is often not the case that is sort of happening in the application itself. It's inspired by the application, but not itself. To give an example, when I talk to people about stuff that I did on gas networks, they are often interested in models that work at sort of very extreme regimes where the gas network operating companies are very, 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 very careful to not operate in these regimes where they say, no. Speed of sound doesn't matter for sort of the speed of gas. We are trying to avoid that at any cost. We're trying to make this very slow. It's nice that you have a model that works when it's close to the speed of sound, but we don't care. And I think that is also something interesting where I think this sort of the hope that we can do sort of both steps in one, I don't think is going to happen.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's sort of my points. Thanks.
Very valid points. Thank you, Lars. David.
Okay, thanks, Chris, for the opportunity to say a few words. So just about me, I'm David Abrahams. I'm an applied mathematician based in Cambridge. I work basically on pure sort of theoretical and applied aspects of wave mechanics. So several talks have touched on that area and made the case. So Mike Jeffries' talk in particular, singularity theory, approximations, etc., very much close to my own heart. But perhaps the most useful thing to say is I've been scientific director at ICMS in Edinburgh and director of the Newton Institute. And so I was very pleased to hear from Charlie Egan in his talk that how that process of I&I programs translate research from the pure end to applied and back again. So one of the reasons for undertaking those roles, spending time and effort doing administrative work, is I'm really very keen to undertake, assist and encourage knowledge exchange. And for me, and I'm sure Chris, Bud and many others, see knowledge exchange very broadly. It's about exchange between different areas of mathematics as much as between maths and other disciplines or with government and outside academia. And then I was thinking about the title of this talk, which Chris, it's meant to be provocative. So Laura, we all think of it one way round, but of course it's the other. And the more you think about it, the more you realize that how can pure maths exist without any input from externally? It would have no basis for its existence. It's a truism, this statement. So everything in mathematics comes from a physical or some other location. So just think about, you know, as Colin talked about orbit problems. I mean, pi has a unique role in mathematics. I don't need to say any more about it, but it would only come into existence in this part of our sort of focal point because of the relationship between, you know, circumference and area of a circle. And then, of course, in the orbit problems, you get into ellipses. The circumference of an ellipse can't be written down in terms of pi. It's elliptic integrals. So you're generalizing, and from elliptic integrals, the inverse of that and the generalization gives you elliptic functions, and that relates to complex analysis, blah, blah. The world explodes when you start thinking about it. And this process goes on all the time. It's not about our own particular piece of research, but that the abstract exercise of doing applied mathematics always funnels those ideas into mathematical ideas, which inform the purer end of our discipline. My own particular interest is in Wiener-Hopf problems, which some of you may know, but they're a particular solution to a type of an integral equation, and they appear everywhere, but in diffraction theory, they're particularly persistent, and the problems associated with those solutions relates to Riemann-Hilbert problems, and then off you go into a whole area of pure mathematics, which has been developed in the last 60, 70 years to deal with those difficulties. So to me, I think it's absolutely essential. So one final point I want to say is that I think we all recognize the way that the natural sciences, and especially astronomy, has informed pure mathematical thinking. And even to this day, recently, people like Michael Atiyah saw this as a unified sort of continuum from the physics world, theoretical physics and or mathematical physics and pure mathematics. But they often see pure mathematicians that dirtier areas of applied mathematics don't have much to offer. And I think this is the way that we as a community can see every part of applied mathematics as having a way of feeding in and informing the next generation of pure mathematician. So that's enough from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. Jess.
Hi, I'm Jess Enright. I work in the School of Computing Science, not even mathematics, at the University of Glasgow. I'm essentially a graph theorist, but because I sometimes do applied things, and by applied I mean very applied. I sometimes also do what you'd consider network science, because as far as I'm concerned, basically, if you're trying to prove things about it, it's a graph, and if you're trying to like sell it as a useful infectious disease model, then or to a physicist, then it's a network. Now I've done, as I mentioned, both, and I like doing this. So to give an example from the myth of time, my PhD was about set representations of graphs. So this is sort of about like, you know, you make graphs out of some intersection of objects in whatever weird space you particularly enjoy and try and prove properties about how they can interact. And then I finished that PhD and went and did a postdoc in controlling bovine viral diarrhea in Scottish cattle using animal movement data. So a very big switch for me. And I was so glad that I did it. And I never had it in mind as a PhD, but a friend of mine had told me that a first postdoc is a great time to try something really different, because if you hate it, no one will be angry. You can come back. But if you love it, then you know there's something else that you love. And so I was really, really glad that happened. But that meant that when I moved to the UK for that postdoc, I really kind of ended up doing a lot of navel gazing when looking at jobs about what even is mathematics versus computing science and mathematics versus applied maths, because lots of jobs I applied for, they would consider the set representation of graph theory stuff, oh, that's clearly computing science, whereas the bit where I wrote a whole bunch of code to process data that we got from cattle movements, oh, that's definitely applied mathematics. And to kind of a naive young person, this seemed a total absurdity to me, right? Like how you would make that decision of kind of what even was CS versus maths, let alone applied maths versus pure maths, seemed really, really difficult to me. And I think that's still something that we're not likely to fox, because I don't think the line is, as we've been hearing all day today, very clear. I don't want to go on too long, but I wanted to kind of laud and support a lot of what Lars said. about how we could be doing KE as a community, and think that what we should be aiming for, perhaps, in my opinion, is KE in the aggregate, or KE as a community, right? That there will be lots of different kinds of careers and ways that people like to work. And there will be people who just don't enjoy applying their work at all. And I don't think that's necessarily a problem, so long as a community we're doing both, all of the different things that we like to do, making the world a better place, as well as finding, joy in mathematics and beauty. So I think we should think about kind of how we do that as a group, and how to enable people, anyone who wants to be engaged in that kind of work, to be engaged in that kind of work with as few barriers as possible. Thanks.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what this meeting's about, is to make those barriers go away and enable everything. So thank you very much, Jess. Colin, firstly, thanks for your great talk earlier on today. Would you like to say a little bit more about yourself and your views on this area?
Sure. So thanks again for having me. I feel like I've spoken enough. People already know who I am. But anyway, I am Colin Blake. I am Deputy Scientific Director for the KE Hub. I'm also newly promoted, or shall be promoted on December 1st, to professor at University of St. Andrews. I'm in pure mathematics. I do group theory. Oh, thanks. But I had a very sort of, from a pure mathematician's point of view, I've had a very sordid past. I was in industry. I used to do finance for Deutsche Bank in New York City. I've had some small companies, and I'm just a person with very, very broad interests. And it just so happens that I've ended up in group theory, and I've looked at a lot of things along the way. Thanks. But the reality is that I just don't believe in these divisions at all. I don't think, I just don't think that there's applied stats and pure. And I think we're a bunch of blind people in a room feeling the elephant at different places and saying it like, it feels windy and like a leaf, or like a trunk of a tree, or and when you feel around enough, you start to see all these other descriptions, and you still, once you engage with the area hard enough, you start to see whatever's challenging about the things that people can't answer. And to me, this curiosity about what can't we answer, leads to all sorts of things, like, can you even describe it? The language question we were talking about before, or anything of this nature. And anyway, this curiosity to find out what is the thing we can't answer, this is what I think makes a mathematician. And so for me, that is mathematics. And I don't really believe in any of these other divisions. It is also true that I'm absolutely horrible with all the toolkits of anything that I don't actually generally do. So I believe in the effective division. We come from our training background, and we have tools that we're comfortable using, and we should try, I believe personally, as a curious person, to try to pick up tools from other areas and work with other people. So that's all my philosophy. But the thing is, because I don't believe in those barriers, I think it behooves humanity, and in general, like even when I was in industry, one of the main issues that you had for success on any project was communication. Even coding, right? If you're doing object-oriented coding, does this object know the information that object has that's crucial for this object to make a decision? And so this information flow is really important. And designing a way to get information to go across all the different active elements is fundamental to success, I think, in any kind of human endeavor. And so that's what I'm all about. I want that information to happen. I don't think everybody needs to love doing impact, but I think that if enough people are penetrating the group theorists who are interested in impact, then those ideas will spread, and so on and so forth. So I believe in networking and these kinds of things, specifically so that we can face the challenges that we face. That's
here. Thank you, Colin. Very, very strongly agree with that. Dave, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to come back on that one point that Colin just made about barriers. I mean, it's such a artificial construct. It's such a 20th century construct. If you look back in history, mathematics never saw itself, Gauss and Euler and everyone else didn't see themselves as being siloed. I think we need to honor everyone's particular interests, and if they want to be very pure or very applied, that's great. We're a very broad church. What we need to do is make sure that we focus on the important and interesting questions and cross-fertilize by answering those questions.
Really good. Yeah, thank you. We have a couple of questions in the chat. I think we'll go in the order we've received. So one from Laura Confalo Norieri, I hope that's pronounced correctly, who says, as a physicist, she's used to seeing theory going into practice, and gives some examples. Do we think mathematics is a bit different in that regard, or well, is maths a sort of special case in a way?
I think that this model is probably not even true in this sort of super clean way in physics or other disciplines. It's often a back and forth. You can't have just, oh, somebody has a good idea and then it's transferred. I think there is the same way that sort of, oh, the applied math is sort of the engine of pure math and it works only that way. I think it's always a back and forth over time with different people. So I don't think that there is, I think there has been an over focus, the way that people set it up by talking about sort of technological readiness levels and trying to apply them to sort of fields like math and physics, even though they're very engineering focused, or thinking about stuff like how we fund impact acceleration by thinking, oh, you have a brilliant idea, then it's transferred into practice. That's sort of the default model, and I don't think it necessarily fits, and I don't necessarily think it fits a lot of subjects. I can see where stuff like this fits more if you sort of scale up stuff, but we don't do really scaling up in the same sense that laboratory sciences do, where they first test something in a laboratory, then build a sort of test plant, and then scale it up. If we write code, which is a lot of what applied math is doing in a sense, well, if the code works, it works. You have some scaling up to do, but not a lot. If the core algorithm is there, then it's there. That's why I think there is a sort of a bit, it's too clean of an idea as to be sort of true.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Lars. Jess.
It's just so I like something that Lars kind of raised, and that's like the non-linearity of this thing, which is one of the reasons I'm glad that we don't so much see the phrase pathway to impact anymore, though it's kind of still around. It suggests that there's this like you start here, then you go here, and like a little board game, you move your little man along the thing. When it is at best snakes and ladders, right? Forward, backwards, up, down. Impact is a weird soup, something more like that. So the whole kind of, I think, 4 steps backwards, then 13 to the side, then 9 straight up in the air. It's not even forwards and backwards is really important to appreciate. Though I'm also going to throw in one sentence saying that my experience of moving code forward is that you can sometimes make extremely large gains. I have to say this, I work in a school of computing science, right? But like if you can change it into matrix multiplication or something like this, you can often make kind of algorithmic gains that make particularly your optimization approach go from kind of like not feasible on big inputs to very feasible on big inputs. And that's one of the few areas maybe where there are kind of 12 linear tricks that we like to deploy.
Thank you. I certainly agree that the kind of ref impact model of just a one-way path through impact from a clever idea to application is not how it works, and we should recognize that much more, I think. Colin.
Thanks. So I think speaking specifically to Laura's question and agreeing with what Jess said about this really being an organic process, if you look in history, there's examples both for physics and for mathematics in both sort of obvious canonical directions. You have tropical geometries developed out of people thinking about computer science engineering, essentially, but then they develop this algebra, and then this algebra ends up being transformative for dealing with bundling debt for, in the banking crisis in 2007. So, at one point you had something which was stimulated by a physical world generating some mathematics, and then that mathematics saves the day in a totally unrelated place in an applied world. And you just have these examples where, there is no, as Jess was saying, there's no just clear path, A, B, C, A, I'm done. Okay, it's like that. we focus because we hear these stories from one side to the other, so we tend to think it's a kind of a directional process, but it really is much more organic, and it's much more, you threw out 1,000 seeds and most of them did nothing, and a few of them grew into these amazing plants, and then they connected up, and suddenly you just had a whole forest. And so this is these kind of unexpected transformative impacts that look like, well, why did they even develop that in the first place? And oftentimes, somebody threw those seeds, perhaps thinking about some sort of physical reality, as Dave was making the comment of, and then the physical reality gets abstracted, and then someone has some sort of pure math thoughts. And then once they had those pure math thoughts, then that simplified some kind of calculation. Like, now I know how to do matrix multiplication, and suddenly all sorts of real world algorithmic problems, if I can transform it into matrix multiplication, then hey, I get a big win. So a lot of times it's really not this sort of linear story. Of course, we write the linear story because that's how we get grants. And how we try to explain to somebody else what really happened. But there's a huge amount of organic formation and structure. There's a talk we didn't quite have was sort of the other side of Mike's talk, right? That there's structure arising out of chaos, and somehow this it's transformative, and it's important for us to notice. And I think one of the things that happens is that we're so focused on the window that we see, we don't have a broad enough perspective to see how organic the whole thing really is. That said, we can always create more impact by throwing a lot of seeds, right? So, you can't predict necessarily which ones are going to sprout, but if you throw a lot of seeds, and if those seeds are relatively inexpensive, that's going to lead to lots of growth down the road.
Brilliant. David, you're on mute.
Apologies there, rookie error. I keep wanting to follow on from Colin's always interesting points. I think, and it goes back to Jess's point, that maybe we can't, we throw these things up in the air and see which seeds root and start to grow. But we can create the structure. So, the idea of stimulating knowledge exchange and having a very open interpretation of how we look at problems, whether they be from the pure end or the applied end, is what we can do as a community. So building this community in the KE Hub is a great example. Hopefully the Academy is as well. And then trying to find people who are inspiring and come and can act as catalysts. So very important to find those people who can think outside the box. And that's probably the role of the applied mathematician, very generally interpreted, is to really abstract problems or model problems in a way which engineers and subject-specific external agents, academics, often don't do.
Thank you. We have another question from Abraham Patawi. In a few minutes we can talk about this. I think Abraham has an extremely good point that maths can have a very long time lag between what you think an application or conversely from an application to actually find maths, which is kind of really relevant to it. So welcome people's comments on Abraham's question. Yes.
Hi. So I think there's a scale at which we can kind of address this and a scale at which it's much harder, right? So like me as an individual writing a grant that doesn't appear to have any obvious applications, it's hard for me to particularly say, oh, well, you should fund this because it might have some application or it might not, maybe a long time in the future, maybe not. That I don't have an answer to. And if anyone has one, please tell me because I enjoy getting funded. I think at a bigger kind of broader, more aggregate level where we're arguing more generally for mathematical sciences as a whole, that we tend to see this impact farther on. This is a case that we can make and that people do make well. Lots of people here make really well, right? And I think we have to use different techniques to do that depending on who our audience is. So if we're talking, for example, and we're talking about essentially like advocacy to government, this sort of thing, then what do they like? They like arguments about the economic value that's being generated now that came from, these kind of long past areas of mathematics. So kind of a combination of like case studies that will capture interest and the sort of quantitative backing it up with the value to the economy or lives saved or whatever. And so I think at that aggregate level where we're saying mathematical sciences as a whole has, in this current moment, all of these great things that are happening because of things that happened in the past. That's something that we can try and do. And I've seen many reports do very, very well. At a smaller field-wise or individual-wise level, I don't know how to do it. And to be frank, I'm not convinced that we actually can in a truthful way, which, you know, doesn't stop us from telling a promising story, but that's a slightly different thing.
Thank you, Jess. Dave, you're still on mute. You're still a rookie.
I'm doing well today. Yeah, two and two, I think it's been. Okay, so coming back to this point, I think Jess's point, a lot of us on the more applied side of our community have fought very hard to maintain the health of discipline. So to make sure that EPSRC and other research agencies are not subverted by following the near term, the short term impact, and to recognize that it's the long game that mathematics plays and its success is really built on that. And it's selling ourselves with a combination of both short-term wins, our interaction with other disciplines as well as outside, and also to maintain a very, very strong and healthy cohort of those who are interested in the purer aspects that we can hopefully engage with, and they will engage with us. It has tended to fracture our community a little bit, and we need to break down those boundaries. Hopefully we can do that over time and then make a very effective case.
Thank you, Dave. Good. Anything from the other? Yes, Lars.
But I also think we need to be, I think the silo aspect that you mentioned is very important, because it also sometimes tends to be coming sort of from the German system, where you have very sort of delineated sort of what is the foundational research versus sort of the applied research, where the split is very clear, where you often have these sort of, you have these funders, we have these funders, and we don't sort of want you to sort of go on the other side of the turf, and we need to sort of worry about this a little bit. It's not as strict anymore. So, but still, sort of, this is sort of an undercurrent that exists, sort of going to applied people and saying, why are you going to sort of pure funding modes when you could go to industry? It is a thing that we need to sort of be looking out for and think about how we can sort of engage in this sort of mix and communication and joint up thinking, where we don't we shouldn't want, as Jess said, everybody to do everything. So saying everybody has to do everything in every grant is sort of wrong. They have to sort of think about the application and about the purity in a sense, or sort of the mathematical push, but sort of thinking about how we can organize this is I think, a very interesting thing. As you said, David, for the health of the discipline of mathematics and preventing it from fracturing again, in a sense.
Yeah. Colin.
Hi, thanks. So I just wanted to speak also just a little bit more concretely to Abraham's question, because I think that when the timeline is long, so I mean, we've all been discussing what the problem is, right? That the timeline can be long, and then you're, essentially somehow you're out of luck. And this is always somehow the thing which happens to pure mathematicians quite often is that they have some kind of some work, and then 20 years goes by and somebody finds an application for it, and then then it's really hard for them to make that claim that their work was relevant there. And we have an issue like at two levels. One is for the individual to get their recognition, but there's also this issue that was spoken a lot about in the Bond Review, which is that mathematics loses its brand. Right, some engineer will come along and use this method to solve some kind of engineering problem, and then everyone says, "Oh, it's great! Engineers are brilliant; they've done this thing." But it was like a direct application of what the mathematician figured out. It's just that nobody cared before, and so then you've lost the brand. And so I think, there's this question of timescale, and in some sense, there's not a lot you can do specifically. Like, so for instance, ref impact case studies. There's a timeline for when your papers can be used that are the underlying basis for support for the ICS. And if you're outside of that timeline, then you're out of luck. If you can show a continuous chain of papers, you can mention this earlier one and say, but since then we've developed these other things and we've been the forefront of this the whole time. That's fine. But if you're just pointing back to something that became impactful years later and you maybe weren't even involved in that, then that's really hard. But what you can do is when you make the grant application, you can say these ideas that I produced in such and such paper from 1970 have now come on into their own, and there's a whole suite of people doing this stuff, and I would like to make this new contribution right here. And then you can draw that story as part of your application. So it's I think that sort of thing is actually quite necessary for us to maintain brand, honestly, even though it's a bit annoying, to talk about work that you did a long time ago that's maybe indirectly involved. But if we want to keep it in the governing body's minds that our work is what's actually done this thing, we need to keep pointing to it. And it is a dog's task. It's not a fun thing to do, to speak about yourself or your old work that way. But it is important. So I do think in some sense we're a little bit out of luck. Once the applications come, it might be too late, and you might have also moved on yourself, and you might have to accept that you're not going to get direct credit for it. But the point is, I think that there are contexts where you can reclaim that credit, and so you have to keep your eyes open to seeing those contexts. And then it might be awkward for you to feel to do this thing yourself, but it's really helpful for mathematics to reclaim your brand. So when we actually point to a thing and say all these great things came up in computer science and this other in engineering, but the initial breakthrough was over here, and we should mention these people that they did this work, even if it's not your own work, I think that's quite valuable to do.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, Jess.
If I can just add on to that in terms of getting recognition for individual people, prizes. You can nominate people. Well, I have to talk. It's literally my job, child. You can nominate people for prizes on the basis of their work being used a long time after they initially did it. I've been on. Well, I'm being as loud as I'm being. This is just my voice. I can't help it, kid. What was I saying? Oh, yes. So I've been on a number of prize committees where we've seen nominations for impact that followed the original pure mathematical work by a very long way. And these can be very, very credible things. Prizes are a way to get somebody, even in late career, really strong recognition. And I encourage everyone all the time to think about people they could nominate for prizes.
Thank you, Jess. Oh, that's great notes. And thanks for doing your job.